Morning, pastors. My name is Dean Condon. I run the church in Corning, All Saints Parish, and it's an honor and privilege for me to be here. I'm happy to be with you. I'd like to welcome everyone who is online and everyone who is gathered here. Let's begin with just a word of prayer. Thank you for this opportunity to come together. We ask that you bless this time. Open our hearts to you and the guidance of your Spirit as we seek your face, as we seek your guidance in the ways in which we can become better leaders, better pastors, and generally better people in all the relationships that we have throughout each of our days. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'd like to start with just kind of a brief story. There was a woman who asked her husband, when she was looking at herself in the mirror, "How old do you think I look?" She'd just been putting on a whole bunch of expensive makeup, and he looked at her and he said, "Your eyes, 18, your hair, 20, your skin, 24. And she just said, "Oh, you're just a big flatterer." And he says, "Wait a minute, I haven't added them up yet." Then ensued a serious conversation, and the trial only lasted a week. Today's talk is on crucial conversations. It's not a term that I made up, but it comes from a book called Crucial Conversations, and also a follow-up book called Crucial Accountability. I'd encourage you to get these books. They're excellent books. They address very ordinary, natural human situations, both at home and in the workplace, and helping us become more effective people. Let me define crucial conversations to begin with. A crucial conversation is a discussion between two or more people where, one, the stakes are high. The issues are important. They're critical. It matters to the people involved. The opinions vary. In other words, not everybody agrees about what they're about to discuss or all the issues that are related to what it is that you're about to discuss. And thirdly, the emotions are strong. And so when these three things come together, we have what's called a crucial conversation. And a crucial conversation matters because the consequences about those crucial conversations can make a big difference. Now, how do we typically handle these kinds of conversations? Well, we can avoid them. Despite the importance of the conversation, we often back away from them because if we're afraid that if we engage them, it's going to just simply make matters worse. And so we tend to hide. Or we can face them and handle them poorly. For example, we might have a critical issue where we write an email or send a voicemail or even post something on social media. Not an effective way of handling a crucial conversation. There was one guy who heard that his wife wanted a divorce through a voicemail. That doesn't work very well. She couldn't handle it and face him straight on. Or we can face them and handle them well. That requires some training. It requires some understanding. If you've ever familiar with someone who has studied martial arts, it can take years to become a black belt. A black belt is a person not who is an expert at martial arts, but has simply mastered the basics in martial arts. In the same way, when it comes to handling crucial conversations, it requires that we understand the basics. It means being able to step out and objectively look at what's going on in order to enter into these conversations more effectively and get the results that we desire. Now, the law of crucial conversations is that at the heart of almost all chronic problems in any organization or our teams or our relationships lies the question of crucial conversations, ones that are either not holding or we are not holding well, and it's perhaps the number one thing that makes leaders effective, even teammates or parents or couples and loved ones in their capacity to handle and address crucial conversations that are either emotionally or politically risky. And that really makes the difference often between success and failure in the life of a leader, but even in the context of a relationship or ability to even parent. here are some examples of crucial conversations. You need to end a relationship. Talking to a coworker who behaves offensively. Asking a friend to repay a loan. Giving the boss feedback about his behavior. Sorry, Michael. Approaching the boss who's breaking one of his own safety or quality policies. Critiquing a colleague about his or her work. Asking a roommate to move out. Resolving custody or visitation issues with an ex-spouse. Dealing with a rebellious teen. Talking with a team member who isn't keeping commitments. Discussing problems with sexual intimacy. Confronting a loved one about substance abuse problems. Talking to a colleague about hoarding information or resources. Giving an unfavorable performance review. Asking your in-laws to quit interfering. Talking to a coworker about a personal hygiene issue. There's just a number of critical conversations that can arise, and crucial conversations can arise. Sometimes they can take us by surprise. You might have your wife ask you, does this dress make me look fat? The wrong answer could turn that quickly into a crucial. So what's at stake? The more crucial the conversation, the less likely we are to handle it well. Precisely because the emotions run high. And when emotions run high, we don't tend to think as clearly and as objectively. And so we say things we regret to say, and we wish we never said them. Unfortunately, it's like toothpaste out of the tube. You'll never get it back in. So, crucial conversations of either avoiding or following them up can have consequences that are severe. It can affect your career, your community, your relationships, even your personal health. I have a friend who was in ministry, and his wife and her mother had, when they had their first child, when that child was born, the way that they were raising them wasn't, well, in the opinion of his wife's mother, the way they should do it. And so they had a crucial conversation that wasn't handled well. As a result of that falling out, she and her mother didn't talk for 25 years. And her mother went to the grave without ever knowing her grandson. So crucial conversations can have massive impacts on our relationships and consequences that can carry literally through our lives. And so handling these things well is a skill that can be learned. That's the good news. It isn't something that just is intuitive for some people and not for others. Now, some people may naturally move in these directions well, but all of us can learn to step back and identify, well, what's going on and how can I enter into these crucial conversations more effectively? So let's talk for a moment a little bit about theory. First of all, dialogue. Just as the word suggests, is a free flow of information between two or more people. In the core of every successful conversation lies this free flow of relevant information, and people openly and honestly express their opinions, share their feelings, and articulate their theories. In other words, why they understand the way things are and the way they work. And so everyone has these things, and you could call them their own pool of meaning. In other words, your opinion, your thoughts, your ideas, is kind of your pool of meaning. Everyone has a pool of meaning that is unique to them. It's theirs, because no two people look at the same things and everything, have all the same feelings and opinions and theories about any singular thing. And so what is critical is that our ability to share that pool of meaning. And so people won't share their pool of meaning unless they feel safe. And so people who are skilled at dialogue make it safe for everyone to share their pool, to share what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and how they understand things are going. Now, people do that differently, even from a cultural point of view. For example, in Korea, people honor their elders in a way that in our country is not so common. I mean, they have such a revere towards their elders that they won't address them. Even their superiors, they might not even look them directly in the eye. So the last thing you do from their culture is challenge someone who is older and who has a higher level of authority. You communicate to them about dissatisfaction, usually in indirect ways. Now, South Korean Airlines, or the Korean Airlines, had a horrendous safety record. They had more crashes than any other airline. And so they were trying to understand why this happened. They had the same equipment that everybody else had. It was all new. It was well taken care of. But they found that there were critical mistakes made by the pilots in these aircraft. Now, in any commercial airline, you have a pilot and a co-pilot. Co-pilot is more than just simply a backup for the pilot, but is an additional set of eyes and ears on how the whole aircraft is operating and what's going on. So what they found was, by listening to the black boxes after these crashes, was that they found that the co-pilots and other people in the cockpit weren't addressing some of the critical issues that were going on. So, for example, particular flight, there was severe icing that was occurring on the wings of the plane, and the pilot was kind of ignoring it. He was distracted and not paying attention. The co-pilot was very aware of what was going on, but because he was the underling compared to the superior, he was hesitant to share what he was seeing. So he would say things instead of like saying, "Hey, the ice on the wings is getting out of control. We got to deal with it." He would say, "You know, it would be a good idea to kind of check on the icing conditions of the plane." Or he might say, "Oh, the weather conditions out there seem to be indicative of possible ice accumulation on the wings." So he tried to say things in an indirect way and wouldn't really share his pool of meaning. As a result, the ice built up and the plane crashed. Everyone was lost. So after enough of these crashes, the Koreans brought in some Western consultants to try to understand, well, how can we fix the problem? And they identified this cultural phenomenon that was going on that was just intuitive and native to their people. And what it was doing was preventing this shared pool of meaning in order for them to move into a healthy and safe place. So all the pilots and the co-pilots and everybody that was all in the cockpit had to go through a retraining of thinking about, okay, I can share fully my pool of meaning, especially when it's critical to safety, in order for the pilot to receive it and not be afraid of repercussions against me for sharing that meaning, which is critical. And so, what are the skills needed to help us come to this place of developing a shared pool of meaning in any conversation and dialogue that we have? Okay, so part of it starts with the fundamental question of what is it that we want. It starts with our hearts. In every critical conversation, every crucial conversation, there is this fundamental desire that in entering into the conversation, we want something out of it. We want a result. And so there's a great quote by Ambrose Bierce that says, "Speak when you're angry, and you will make the best speech that you will ever regret." And so when we operate out of emotions, we're liable to enter a place that we profoundly regret. Now, so we begin with ourselves. And you're the only person who can directly control yourself. Now, one day on a trip, we came down from Rochester. It's about an hour and a half drive home. We were at my mother's house. The kids had just eaten. They'd been drinking. They were heading home. And by the time we arrived home, bladders were full, okay? Now, the two, one was 10 and one was 8 at the time, made a beeline to get into the house. The door was locked. We had a lot of stuff to unload. I took my time getting to the door. So even by the time I got to the door and the door was unlocked, tensions were even higher. So they both ran down to the bathroom, both got into at the same time, and a fight ensued. Who gets to use it first? And they went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And after about 10 minutes, finally, I mean, we got like 5 bathrooms in our house. It's a huge finally, it was that one went and then the other went. It took longer for them to argue than it took for them to do what they needed to do. Precisely because there was not really a sense of what they wanted to accomplish. They had something else in mind. And so we can focus on what we really want and pay attention to our motives and ask ourselves, does our behavior, what does my behavior tell me about what it is that my motives are? And so we can have poor motives that can include a variety of things. One example would be winning. We want to win. And we're taught to win. Our culture is based on the idea that I want to win. Okay? In the case of my children, that was their motivation. It wasn't about getting the business done. It was about who was going to win and be first. That's what mattered. And so as a result, they both suffered needlessly long, a lot longer than they would have had they just simply decided to cooperate and take turns or use different facilities at the same time. And so we can slip into this mindset of just wanting to win. Another is we can punish. When we move from winning into the point where we actually move into attacking. We attack the other person with an argument, and we move not just with an argument, but we start attacking the person. You're first because you're selfish and you always want to get your way first. And so we move into the area of personal attack. Now, take for example in a workplace where a manager addresses the people in the room. And so perhaps the issue in the company is cutting costs. And so they're addressing the people about cutting costs, not the first time, but it seems like there's a real lackluster response among all the people in the office trying to cut costs. And then finally, one of the individuals in the group stands up and kind of anxiously clears his voice and says, well, you've been asking us to scrimp on copies and use our pencils longer and be careful about how many things we buy that are discretionary. But at the same time, you're renovating your office space and putting in a new conference room. We understand that it's costing $80,000. Okay. Now, the question is, how does the manager respond? Perhaps the manager stiffens up, grips the podium to a white knuckle sort of framework, and basically asserts his or her authority and says, this is my business about what I'm doing with my conference room, and this way, sit down and shut up. So that would be a person who just wants to win. As a result of that, what happens is that the behavior in the office doesn't change because they don't believe that you're really committed to cutting costs only for your own sake and your own benefit. You're putting in this new office, so we got to cut costs over here. Or the person could have retaliated by saying, you have no idea what it actually costs, and this has a purpose for my business and what I want to do, and you just simply really don't have any understanding of what it takes to run a business. That would be punishing. Yes.
Do you think that employee had the right to say that to their employer in that particular situation?
Well, I think yes. The question is okay, how do you do that in a way that doesn't create either retaliation? I mean, the other solution, keeping the peace. That's the third way in which we can have a poor motive. We can just keep the peace. all the employees could have just said nothing and then said, okay, we're not going to address the elephant in the room. Nobody cares about cutting costs because it appears the boss doesn't care about cutting costs for himself. So yes, they can address it, but in a way that's respectful, in a way that in a moment we'll explore, okay, how do we understand the story behind the question? And so if you attack the boss and say, well, you're not cutting costs, you're just spending a whole bunch of money on yourself, that's telling a story that accuses your employer and in a sense potentially humiliates them, which we'll talk a little bit more about too, is that as opposed to saying something like, wow, you're asking us to cut costs, but it appears that we're not cutting costs over here. And so that involves an explanation. That invites an explanation into it. But an accusation doesn't. It comes up, it tells a story about what the other person's motive is that may or may not be accurate. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, a lot of that has to do with how much you trust your boss. I had an employee who was a pastoral associate in my previous parish, but we had developed a high level of trust to the point where she could talk to me in ways that I could have taken and been upset with or really embarrassed by. I mean, this would be kind of an extreme example. One day it was summer and we didn't have air conditioning in the building, and so we'd wear lightweight clothing, and I wore a white lightweight short sleeve shirt. And so she came into my office and said, I got to talk to you about something. And I said, what? I got to talk to you about your clothes. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I can see your nipples. and I said, that you can. Okay. I didn't have an undershirt on. So she felt confident enough to trust that wouldn't evoke a kind of retaliation, or just say, well, it's only for one day and maybe it won't be so hot next week. But she shared with me some valuable information that was helpful to me, because she wasn't the only one who could make that observation, and I wasn't looking carefully in the mirror at myself. And so I appreciate that feedback, but not everyone would. Not most employees wouldn't have trusted their employer to the level where they could talk about their employees' dress or the clothing that they were wearing. And so part of it is hopefully an employer establishes a sense of trust among employees where employees can openly share their pool of meaning. So it comes down to a question of what is it that I really want. Now, after winning, punishing, it was keeping peace. Keeping peace can be a way of avoidance, not addressing the elephant in the room, and then what happens is the change doesn't take place. And so then I ask myself what I really want for myself, for others, and for the relationship. And so all three of those things need to come into a kind of balance in order to come up with an effective result to a crucial conversation. So we can buy into a mentality that says there's a fool's choice. And a fool's choice is either I win or I lose. And I have this mindset that I'm either winning or losing, or I have to choose between relationship and what I want. And so I have this mindset that it's an either or. But the wise leader, the wise parent, the wise husband, the wise wife looks at how can I find the and? How can I move in a direction that moves towards something I want, understand what the other person wants, and build the relationship? Not only do I have a situation where I preserve the relationship, but maybe it's an opportunity to enhance the relationship. And so part of it is to really be able to define for myself, what is it that I really want here before I enter into the crucial conversation? Now, sometimes you don't have a choice because the crucial conversation has been started by somebody else. You know, they're the ones, or it comes up spontaneously. Like, for example, you're talking and your wife says, well, last night at the party, you were really flirting with that woman. So what do you mean you were flirting? Well, you were practically making out with her. I was just trying to be nice. And then she storms out of the room. Well, okay, you've got a crucial conversation on your hands. And you can just ignore it and try to keep the peace. But obviously, this is not going to go well. You have to enter into the conversation, begin to talk about, well, what is it that was happening? Why was it happening? How did she perceive it? What did she understand? What did I understand? And kind of define all these things in order to move forward. Now, it's probably likely that if that kind of thing came up, there may be other issues that are underneath it that may need to be addressed. And so a little digging further, well, what is it that I want? And that's also defined over and against what is it that I don't want. What do I don't want to happen? Well, I don't want the relationship to have bad feelings. I don't want it to have a waste of time where it doesn't lead to change, but rather, take, for example, again, in a marriage, a wife is upset that her husband doesn't meet her expectations, and that when she asks him to do stuff, he isn't reliable in carrying through on those requests. She depends on him to do so. Okay, so part of what can happen is she articulates why that matters to her. And she can also understand that she doesn't want to enter into a heated conversation and create a whole bunch of bad feelings that ends up not creating any kind of change at all in either one of them. And so part of it's defining, well, what is it do I want to get out of here? And that's helpful in the explanation to someone instead of just saying, hey, you always screw up. I asked you over and over again. I can never depend on you to accomplish what it is that I want you to do. And then it doesn't go anywhere. The guy feels insulted. She's just mad. No change takes place. There isn't any exploration of how to solve and fix the problems. And so by stepping back and figuring out, okay, well, what is it that I want out of this and what I don't want, allows us to step back and actually introduce a more complex question to our brains that requires a little bit more reflection about having a conversation, say, with the husband about what does it mean to be more dependable and how do we avoid creating bad feelings or wasting our time on this. In business, part of it is helping people have a shared value. You know, when people work, sometimes employers think that, well, their reward is their salary. Well, certainly in ministry that isn't the case, but they're about wanting to be about something more. They want to be about something bigger than themselves. But that isn't true only in ministry. In any real organization, people are contributing and they are getting a salary and they are being compensated for what they are accomplishing. But for most people, they want to feel significant about what it is that they're doing. Now, ministry has that inherently built into it. Salary is sort of a necessary evil that needs to take place in order to do what you need to take care of, but then also a reward for what you accomplish. But it goes far beyond that. People want to be invested in something of shared meaning about the whole organization. This is about something bigger than ourselves. And so even if it's ranging from just simply say, well, arranging the chairs in this room needed to take place, the camera set up, all that is sort of regular, ordinary things, but all of it has a bigger meaning in terms of what it is that we want to accomplish. In the end, really, communication, effective communication around crucial conversations is not just about the sharing of information, but really creating a desired result. What is it that we want to have happen out of this interaction? Now, the next piece is safety awareness. We need to learn to look and how to notice when safety is at risk. Because the loss of safety, when that happens, that is probably the number one thing that causes crucial conversations to go off the rails. So, feelings of being attacked or humiliated are the number one things that take away safety in a crucial conversation. Because what happens when that occurs, the reaction is one fundamentally of fear. And fear drives us into either two directions. The result is either fight or flight. Okay. Now, what's happening is a very fundamental thing in the human condition is we have, and I don't know enough about the biology of the brain, but in the brain, we have areas in our brain that govern the higher reflective functions in our brains. And then we have other areas in our brains, I think they're at the base of our skulls, that operate the more instinctual patterns of our behavior. And this is done, certainly fight or flight in terms of when there's physical danger, but now this is more emotional danger. We're very emotional creatures. God has created us to be that way. And we can read the emotions in another human being by literally dozens, if not hundreds of subtle facial expressions. And if you know somebody well, just simply the position of someone's eyebrows, the position of their mouth, how their eyes look can communicate a whole slew of emotion. It's an amazing and beautiful thing that God has created. I mean, we get emotionally upset, we cry. We get super happy, we can cry, but it's clearly a different kind of cry. And we as human beings can pick that up. Now, what happens is when we feel that we are being threatened, either by humiliation or through an attack, our complex side of our brain shuts down and we move into an emotional side of our brains that causes us to gravitate towards flight or fight. And so the key, and we'll talk about that a little later, is the response mechanism that allows us to choose which part of the brain we want to operate into. And so there are fundamental directions. Flight is expressed through typically silence, a form of silence. Now, silence doesn't mean we say nothing. It can come in a variety of different ways or different expressions. One of them is masking. Masking is understanding or selectively understating or selectively showing our opinions. In other words, we don't really come out and say what we want to say. Sometimes this can be expressed in the form of sarcasm. You might say, yeah, I think your idea is really great. Yeah, it's just brilliant. We'll just see how that works. And, underneath that is basically saying, you're an idiot. Okay. Another form is avoidance. This is steering completely away from a sensitive subject at all. We just avoid to do it. And so, say, for example, the speaking of the cutting costs scenario. You might say something like, hey, what if we dilute the coffee? We could save a lot of money there, right? Okay, or trivialize the whole thing by talking about insignificant things and not addressing the core issue. The third way silence is expressed is by withdrawing, just simply pulling out of a conversation. It can be even exiting the room. It can be just sort of a change of subject. It just says, okay, I don't really want to talk about this, so I want to move into a different direction. Now, violence. Violence is the other direction. That's the fight. Now, I'm not talking about physical violence. I mean, that's off the charts if it gets physical violence. And that can happen, but physical violence is just all around never acceptable. I don't need to go any further with that. But here are the three ways in which violence is typically expressed in a crucial conversation. One is controlling. And this is coercing others into your way of thinking. It's done by either forcing our views on others or dominating the conversation. Examples of this can be interrupting people, cutting them off, overstating your facts, speaking in absolutes like you always do this or you never do that, changing the subject, or using direct questions to control the conversation. It could say, why don't you care enough to do what I want? Well, I answer that question. Oh, I don't. I'll never do what you want. It's a go nowhere kind of question, but it puts the person into an utterly indefensible place. It's a form of attack. Or even if you say something like, you're always late. or you don't let the person express their ideas or opinions because either you think you know what they're going to say or you don't like what they're going to say. A second way of doing violence is by labeling. This is putting a label on people or ideas so you can dismiss them under a general kind of stereotype or category. You know, if you're having a disagreement with your spouse, or you can just say, you know, that's not a Christian way of thinking. Well, I mean, who can argue with God? You know, if it's the Christian way of thinking, you know, there's no way to respond to that. There's no way to, it's just dismissed out of hand. That's not a biblical way of looking at it. You know, or it might be put into political categories. It might be put into just any kind of stereotypical category, or like talking to your friends or your kids rather. You say, okay, you know, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you do that too? Well, obviously not. But you know, it's kind of dismissing their friends out of hand for whatever opinions and practices they have. It shuts the conversation down. And then there's attacking in itself. You focus, you move from winning to causing the other person to suffer. This can be by belittling or by threatening. Now, all of us have a way in which we gravitate to one of these areas when we enter into an emotionally stressed or difficult, crucial conversation. And so what's critical is really identifying what is our go-to when anxiety rises in a crucial conversation. Because that's, you know, first we deal with ourselves before we can deal with others. And so we begin to look at ourselves. How do we cause the conversation to go off the rails? And then what can we do that can positively affect the way in which other people find safety? And so we're invited to make it safe. I like Proverb 25:11 that says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a basket of silver. You know, if we can speak well, if we can address people well with our words, it's like a gift of gold in a silver basket. So part of the process of being able to do that is that when other people are moved to silence or violence, it invites us to step out of the conversation, make it safe. When safety is restored, go back to the issue on hand and continue the dialogue. So I'll say that again. That's step out of the conversation, make it safe, and when safety is restored, go back to the issue at hand and continue the dialogue. So one way in which to address this is a term called differentiation. In other words, a lot of times, and this is true in ministry, we have a lot of heart. It's true in all areas of life, but ministry, I think I find it particularly challenging because we so fundamentally want to succeed and we care about the thing that we're doing. And so when it gets criticized or when it gets brought up for evaluation, it's hard for us to separate ourselves and our value and who we are from what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. And the ability to do that is differentiation. I can differentiate myself from what's going on at this moment in a conversation or what it is I'm doing in my ministry or my work. And so that when somebody criticizes it, I can step back and objectify and look at what's going on and not take it personally. A person who can differentiate well is able to receive feedback which might require change or might be pointing out ways in which I failed or fallen short of good expectations. In a conversation, either a person is going silent or a person is getting violent. Either one of those two in the conversational terms. We can step back and take a look and say, all right, this is happening because this person, for whatever reason, doesn't feel safe. Now, I might not know that right away, but as we learn the art of good, crucial conversations, we can step back and ask ourselves, okay, well, what is it that is causing this person to feel this way and respond this way? Now, if they haven't developed the art of handling crucial conversations well, they may be operating out of very instinctual places that they've had patterns of badly learned behavior in these areas for years and years. And so take in a relationship with a husband and wife, if both of them commit to kind of embracing the art and the skills of crucial conversations, what can happen over time is they can learn to address these things without them being just emotionally charged. And they can come to a place where, okay, I know I can enter into a crucial conversation with my spouse about something safely because we've learned the rules. We've learned the patterns. We've learned how this works well. So the conditions that put safety at risk fall generally into two categories. Either the person doesn't believe that you have a shared mutual purpose, or there isn't a shared mutual respect. So in the area of mutual purpose, does the other person believe that I care about the goals of this conversation, where it's going, from their perspective? Do they believe that? If they don't believe it, they're going to feel at risk. Or do they trust my motives? If they don't trust my motives, where I'm going, and trying to manipulate things, or just trying to get things my way, or get my interests taken care of, they're not going to feel safe. And they're either going to get violent, they get angry, they get violent, they withdraw, they pull back, they don't share, they don't enter into the conversation fully, they shut down. Now, the mutual respect is a little more obvious, but do that person believe that you respect them in the course of the conversation? If that's lost, then it all goes off the rails really quickly, even faster than the whole question of mutual purpose. And so the question is how do we restore a sense of purpose and respect in the situations in which they're lost? So the respect piece is, in some ways, a little easier from the standpoint that if we identify the fact that we've offended somebody and they don't feel that we've respected them, well, we've clearly done that. We failed to respect who they are. The solution is to move to apologize. Now, hopefully they're in a place to be able to accept an apology. Not everybody is, but to sincerely, heartfelt apologize. If that hasn't happened, the other component is probably an issue related to purpose. Now, they may have perceived that you haven't respected them, and so it requires some feedback to understand, okay, well, how do you not feel respected? And so if they say, well, this is how you've not respected me, you can't turn around and say, you're wrong. I mean, that doesn't work. So I had in my previous pastorate, I had a situation where I had a fairly new director of faith formation for our community. They directed the adult faith formation stuff. And so we had a regular event where we would have all those who were new to the church come to an event where we served like hors d'oeuvres and this kind of thing, and they met everybody in ministry. And so we had a pattern of how we did that. And so she was in charge of taking care of the setup and that sort of thing. And so just about a half an hour before the meeting was to take place, we walked in and it was set up like this, like an auditorium. And what she didn't know, because I didn't tell her, is that we put it in small circles, like circles of 8. And so that people would face each other in dialogue. It wasn't about sort of this lecture process that we're going through here. It was about getting people to meet each other in dialogue. Well, we scrambled and turned all the chairs around and got it the way we wanted it. Well, come Monday morning, she was livid. She was really angry. And at first, I was angry because it was like, I had to do what I had to do. You didn't know. But I needed to address it because what was set up wasn't going to work and accomplish the goals that we wanted. But she was really angry because she felt disrespected. One, that I didn't communicate effectively to her what the expectations were. That was my fault. Secondly, I didn't communicate to her, and it wasn't going to be easy, but I didn't make the effort to communicate to her that that was a problem that had arisen. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you, but we need these chairs set up a different way. That's my fault. Probably would have gone a lot smoother. Instead, she just walked in the room to see that everything she had done the day before was undone. What was the purpose of having me do the job at the beginning? And so I needed to apologize and recognize, okay, I messed up. But that didn't occur to me initially. My initial reaction was to get kind of miffed and angry back and think, wow, she's just being picayune and she's just being fussy about something that really wasn't a big deal. But it wasn't about how much work was involved. It was about her being respected. So the second thing is in terms of how do we restore mutual purpose? And so part of that is expressing what it is that we intend or mean. We actually say this is what we want to do, and then what we want to avoid. So say we had a tense conversation with your spouse about how meals were prepared, something like this. And so you enter into it, and you don't want to create tension. You don't want to hurt the relationship. You don't want to express a sense of lack of gratitude. And this was, you can articulate those things. But this is what I need to have happen. I've got a meeting to go to. We need to eat earlier, and I can't participate in the family meal unless things happen earlier. And so we begin to express what it is that we want in the relationship. The last thing I want to focus on, and there is more in these books than I could possibly cover in an hour, is the whole question of stories. Master my stories. How to stay in dialogue when you're angry, scared, or hurt. What's important to understand is that emotions just don't happen. For example, others do not make you mad. And you might say, he makes me so mad, or she makes me so mad, but they don't. We choose our emotions. Okay. So they don't fall on us like a fog or a rain. We embrace them. So once we've created our upset emotions, we have two options. We can either act on them or be acted on by them. And one, we either choose, you are either a master or you are a slave. Master your emotions or you are a slave of your emotions. Now, how do we choose our emotions? We have an intuitive reaction is that we feel one way and then we act on it. But there is another way. There's an alternative to this. And that is to see and hear and observe. We can tell ugly stories about other people. We can come up. Now, stories provide a rationale for what's going on. They explain to us why things happen. We do it all the time, and we do it constantly. It's just a way in which we need to add meaning to the events that take place. But the reality is that with any set of circumstances, there can be 100 different ways of explaining why these facts, what we observe, has happened. And so we can choose instead to tell ugly stories to ourselves. But if we choose, we get to choose our story. And we get to develop our story based on either getting input from the other person or not. Now, if, for example, this woman who set up the chairs decided, okay, well, he hates me or he doesn't respect me. She just told a ugly story about me. She's the victim, so we can tell victim stories. It's not my fault. And instead, you can choose to become an actor. Or you can tell a villain story to yourself and say, that person is just a jerk. That person has no consideration of all the work that I did, and they simply don't care about my needs. So we tell a villain story. Or we can tell a helpless story. So there's nothing else I can do. I'm just a victim. I can't do anything here, and I'm paralyzed. But instead, we can move to ability. Now, we can tell these stories, and when we tell these stories that portray an individual through a negative lens, we attribute motives to them that are negative. It's going to evoke a negative emotion in ourselves. And then we'll respond accordingly. Now, what makes matters worse is if you tell the story to the person for them. In other words, if she had said to me, you did this because you don't care about people. All you care about is your glory. And you want things run your way, and you just simply don't care enough about me to take the time of day to let me know what you really want. You just expect me to figure it out on my own. And when I don't, you just don't care. Now, she may be right, or she may be wrong. But it doesn't matter. Even if you tell a ugly story that may actually have some truth to it, that person is very liable to not be receptive to what you have to say. Instead, allow the person to tell their story. And so in this particular example, I might have responded by saying, you know, I didn't even think about your stuff. It didn't even occur to me. And when I walked into the room, I realized that the room setup was not going to adequately accomplish what it was that we needed to do. So I didn't even tell you because I didn't want you being burdened. I just decided to rearrange the chairs myself because I know you did the work the first time around, and I didn't want to ask you to do the work the second time around. Well, I think that's a reasonable explanation. I failed to honor her in other ways, but my motives weren't bad. And so when I was able to eventually explain and tell that story from a different perspective, she had a greater level of understanding. And so when we're able to embrace where other people are at, allow them to tell their story, and allow ourselves to hear it. Now, the stories may not always make a lot of sense, but we continue to explore that. And so we can, in a sense, retrace our steps and go backwards and figure out, okay, where did my emotions go awry in my own situation, or help the other person by, if they've reacted through either silence or violence, explore, well, why is that? What's causing that response? And in a sense, let them tell their story from their perspective, because they may be telling an ugly story about you and never even said anything to you. And so to be able to unearth their story about you, which may or may not be accurate. To kind of draw this kind of to a conclusion, and there's more in these books that can be explored in this brief amount of time, is that we want to move to action. We want to be able to turn critical conversations into actions and results, and to turn these into successful conversations that integrate decisions and unite actions. And so part of it, especially in a organizational setting, is deciding on how to decide. So one way is through command. In other words, decisions are made without involving others. Sometimes that can be the case. And so the question you might want to ask is who cares? Determine who generally wants to be involved in the decision-making process along with those who are affected by it. And so it may only be one person, but it may need a group of people. Or the second way would be through consultation, or to consult. And so input is gathered from a group, and then a subset decides. And so the question here might be, who knows? Identify people who are either experts or have special knowledge about the situation at hand. And so consultation is to take place. And in the case of a married couple, that might mean counseling. Counseling, we need someone who can help us move through this issue because we keep running into loggerheads and not being able to move forward. The third way of making decisions is through vote. where an agreed percentage of people swings the decision. And so here we might be asking questions about, who must agree to this? Do we need agreement with all people or just some of the people? And people's willingness and ability to cooperate in the decision may dictate how you want to arrive to that decision. If you need everybody involved, doing a vote isn't always an effective way to do it. The other way would be consensus, the last way, where everyone comes to an agreement and then is committed to supporting what the final decision is. Now, you want to look at how many people you want involved in any kind of question or decision-making process. The goal would be to involve the fewest possible without excluding critical people. And so once that happens, you can finish clearly, then you can begin to develop a follow-up plan that makes what the deliverables are, what is that you want to accomplish, what results you want, crystal clear. And so you set up a follow-up time and you record the commitments and what's happening here, accountable. And so you're asking, what is going to be done by who, by when, and set those things clearly up. The last bit I included was just a variety of Bible verses on things that relate to how we speak to one another. Because, a gentle tongue is a tree of life. But perverseness in it breaks the spirit. How we speak to each other can make or break our spirit. We can typically hurt people far more through our words than just about anything else. And it doesn't take much. It just takes a thoughtless word. It takes a quick word. It takes an unreflective word. It can just take a crucial conversation and derail it off into a tragedy. That can have consequences over many years. So with a couple minutes we have left, any questions? Yes.
When you were talking about earlier, when somebody approaches you and confronts you and about, say, a project you're doing in the church, and they don't like the way that it's been done or the way that you're doing it, are you saying in a sense when you're divorcing yourself from what they're saying, that you're not what, I guess, how do I say this? You're not what you do. You know what I mean?
Well, in a sense,
it's not me. I
yes.
made mistakes, but it's not me.
In other words,
you don't take offense at what they're saying.
Right. That's a question of differentiation. People, any, say, a congregation of any group of people, any decision that's made, the likelihood of bringing all 100% of all people in full agreement with that decision is almost nil. So there is a high percentage chance that someone will not like a decision that's made, especially if it's of any significance. By the way, you'll never enter into crucial conversations unless you're actually trying to do things of significance. If you just want to avoid crucial conversations, just lead the most mediocre life you could possibly live, and you'll avoid them. And so the point being that when you have a situation where you've maybe invested a lot into it, maybe you're the music director and the person hates the way you're doing music, okay? If that person comes to you and criticizes you, you can really take it personally as a personal direct insult on you, as opposed to differentiating yourself. Okay, this person's criticizing what's happening. That isn't me. If I failed, maybe I majorly messed up and I did something really poorly, okay? That person may criticize it. Again, to differentiate, I'm not going to say I'm a failure because I failed. I did something poorly. That still isn't me. If I don't differentiate, I'm just going to wallow in my sorrow and just feel lousy about myself and not be able to move on. Just take it so personally. And people, that's why a lot of times through criticism, ministers get beat up, they lose the ministry. They say, I can't take this anymore. I didn't come in to the ministry to be criticized, and they give up. Yes.
One online, it's is it necessary to still explain your reasoning for making a certain decision when you made it clear in the first place what your expectations would be from the others in the decision-making process.
That's a good question. There's a balance there. I mean, if a person doesn't want to accept the rationale and keep challenging the rationale, you can end up wasting a lot of time by going over and over again. But you have to go back and ask the question, what it is that you want. If the person doesn't understand the rationale with the first explanation, and you want this person to come along with you, you'll need to kind of explain it again. You'll need to take the time and say, okay, this is what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. This is why the decision was made. There comes a point where if it's the same person asking the same question over and over again, it becomes a waste of time. But if you really want to bring them along, you can't just dismiss them and say, hey, we already went through that, it's done. Get on the train or get off.
That's good.
Anything else? All right, well, our time is up. I want to thank you and God bless you.